There are times for saints to consider garments. It's time for some inventory on garments for this sermonette. Clothing is not only outerwear, but identity. It can show our profession, like police or medical staff, but also it shows our culture, our nationality, our social status. It's also supposed to match our sex and gender. Now, there's an interesting Greek word in Strong's 1746, enduo. It's translated put on. It's translated put on 18 times in the New Testament as put on, but other times as variations of it, like being clothed with, being wrapped around with, that kind of thing. It comes from two Greek words, and when you put them together, the translation put on, as the dictionary said, it gives you the idea that you sink into a garment. So it isn't just a wrapping of clothes or putting on of clothing, but you also, as what some of the lexicons say, you actually sink into a garment, kind of sink into it. Some of that will make a little more sense after checking a few more scriptures. We could see a little symbolism from here that it's more than a covering. We're going to view some of the things that saints are told to put on in the New Testament scriptures. Now, this word used in verses describing what we put on, I'm going to mention verses so you can just write them down in your notes, look them up another time. I'm only going to turn to one verse. The other ones you can just write down for the future. So the first place we're going to mention is we put on a new set of character traits. Write down the verse Colossians 3, verse 12. There, we put on bowels of mercies, kindness, meekness, and it lists like 4 or 5 other characteristics. It's putting on like clothing, but yet it's putting it into our very nature. It's changing us on the outside. It's more than just clothing. Let's go a little further. We also, and write this other verse down, we put on a new identity. Now, write down verse Ephesians 4:24. In that verse, we're being told that we're to put on the new man. And it's that same word, put on, like a garment, like clothing. Putting on the new man, which is after God, and it actually mentions God's creation, a putting on, a new identity. So we already have characteristics of how we change. We have also an identity, so it's more than just a covering. Now let's go on to something even more profound of what we put on. I'm going to mention 2 more verses you can write down, Romans 13:14 and Galatians 3:27. They talk about how we become how in the process of putting on that same word, we actually are putting on another identity, a very important one, Christ. We actually are becoming more and more like Christ himself. In the verse of Galatians 3:27, and you can look that up yourself later, when we become baptized in Christ, we are putting on Christ. The word says put on like a garment or sink into a garment, but it also means putting on a new identity, another person. We're becoming somebody else in this life. Now, just ponder this also in that very verse. It also says when those that are baptized into Christ are putting on Christ. Interesting, the symbolism there, because you have a burying and then you have a covering of a new man. Now, let's turn to 1 Corinthians. Now, there we are going to turn to a verse. 1 Corinthians 15, very well-known, of course, chapter that we all look into. Resurrection chapter, everyone. We all know it. We've been there multiple times. Take a look at 1 Corinthians 15:54. Talks about what happens in the resurrection, multiple verses you will see. But in verse 54, so when this corruptible shall have put on incorruption, and this mortal shall have put on immortality, then shall the saying that is brought to pass, the thing that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. Incorruption covers corruption. Mortal is going to be covered by immortality. Physical decaying human beings, ordinary humans, all of us, just physical beings, covered, put on immortality. So there's some few things to ponder here in terms of clothing, what saints ought to put on. Let's step back for a minute and compare that. And we're not going to turn there. Many of you already know this chapter. In Revelation 19, a woman rides the beast. She's got purple and scarlet, gold and precious stones, and she's got a golden cup. Pretty nicely dressed, huh? No, she isn't. She is nicely dressed, but inside that cup, I don't even want to try and translate the words. They mean things that are foul, detestable, just, really bad. That is from the woman who rides the beast. God's people are to put on new character, new identity, and the identity and the mind of Jesus Christ himself. We, in the Church of God, we are called on to put on all the right things, better garments.